give a fuck.
Are you sure?
I just don't give a fuck.
Presenting The Art of Not Giving a Fuck with Garrett John.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another Art of NGF from Victim to Adventurer podcast. Today we've got a very special guest, the author and teacher Robert Scheinfeld. Now Robert's the author of quite a few books. Some of them I'll mention: Busting Loose from the Money Game, Busting Loose from the Business Game, Ultimate Key to Happiness, as well as many and varied online and real life experiences. And we'll get into some more of that as we go. And then if you check the show notes, you'll be able to follow some links and go deeper in whatever direction you feel moved to do so. So welcome, Robert. It's nice to have you back on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. I wanted to start by mentioning something that occurred right after our last interview, which was a few years ago now. At the time I was in Ojai, California, which incidentally I noticed you did somewhat recently did an event there, which was also interesting to me. But at that time I went to go ahead and post the interview after we had discussed a lot of concepts about phase 1, phase 2, and then at that time the ultimate key to happiness. We focused a lot of the discussion around that topic. And at the time of putting up the interview, I was sitting at a coffee shop there in Ojai and started thinking about what we had been talking about and sort of had an experience of almost what I would have to call a blackout. Language doesn't really serve well here, but I'll try. Some kind of blackout where I thought, well, I've never read any books. There's never been a Robert Scheinfeld. There's never been a Jed McKenna. None of this stuff ever happened. It's irrelevant to life. It doesn't matter. It didn't need any ideas. It's just been this storyline. And sort of everything kind of went black. And there was, I don't know how to describe it, some sense of nothingness. And then as it sort of felt like reemerging back into the coffee shop and the space composing itself again. And then I thought, well, what am I even posting this for? This whole doing anything feels absurd. Or not doing anything is equally absurd. There's no meaning behind any of it. And then at some point I found myself just sort of automatically posting the interview and finishing with the blog post and carrying on with the rest of the day. But from that point forward, a lot of the things that had seemed important up until that moment seemed to not have any importance anymore, at least in the same way that I had conceived of that, those levels of intensity. So I wanted to start with that point and leap off from there. We don't have to cover any of that same ground because all those teachings are available, everything's out there. So if anybody's hearing this and doesn't have context for what we dive into, that'll be provided in the show notes anyway. So from that experience, I felt like that's where I went after reading the Ultimate Happiness book. Now more recently I took the Journey to the Infinite course, which is sort of a review. So what's next? What's going on in your sphere now? What are you working on as we speak? I know there's the Being and Truth experience. So what comes next?
Well, the image that was given to me I don't call it meditation and I don't use any particular method, but every day I take about an hour of quiet time and I just close my eyes and I have this thing called a zero gravity chair that I just relax back into, and whatever happens, happens, but I just take quiet time. And I was doing that about, I don't know, a year and a half ago, and a message appeared in what I now call inner space. A voice spoke to me and said, gave me, and then it was almost like a video was playing, and I was told, it's kind of like you got on a train, a high-speed bullet train 10 years ago, Robert, and the journey, the destination of the train was an experience of truth with a capital T, and I knew that, but I didn't know the specifics of the destination, and it seemed like every time I was on the train, I had all these wild, crazy, traumatic, confusing, difficult, amazing experiences, going deeper and deeper into truth, and then I'd pop up and I'd offer a debrief of some kind, which was a book or a course or a whatever. And I was told with what you're now calling ultimate freedom and what you're now calling phase 3, you've reached the destination that your journey, your life, your story was about, and you're off the train. And you're not going to get back on again. There aren't going to be any more thematic going deeper. This was the destination that your life story was meant to take you to. And the rest of your life, you're going to spend, if ultimate freedom and phase 3 were a place, and they're not, but if they were, the image was like, you're going to spend the rest of your life exploring this gigantic, amazing place and sharing with other people how to get there and how to play there and what it's like. So that's what I've been doing. I've been experiencing what I call ultimate freedom, experiencing what I call phase 3. Those two things are synonyms for each other. I call it ultimate freedom because that's what it feels like. That's if I was going to try to, phase 3 is just kind of a term, but ultimate freedom is really what it feels like. And so that's my new term for the ultimate destination for me for phase 3. And so I've been enjoying that myself, and then I've been putting different kinds of things into place and evolving the ways that I share and open a gateway for other people into experiencing that same thing.
Excellent. And that's the place I wanted to get a little deeper into, or at least to hear about maybe some of the differences, because since you were calling it a destination, it seems to also imply a journey of some sort. And I know some of this is linguistic, but there is a journey implied. Even, the ultimate key to happiness implies there's a locked door, a key, and then an unlocking. The busting loose is like you're tied up, and then you're breaking free of that. And then ultimate freedom even sort of implies, like what you just said, there's a place that didn't seem to be that, and then now there is that, so to speak. I don't know how to better describe it.
The metaphor that I'm fond of using, that I used with you last time, and I've used in various places, but it works really well, is the metaphor of sun and clouds. Mm-hmm. If you take a look at the sun, we think of the sun and we think of huge amounts of energy and power and light, and so it's a great metaphor for who we really are. And I've called who we really are various things in my career. At one point I called it director, another point I called it inner CEO, another point I called it expanded self or consciousness with a capital C. My current label, because to me it's the most accurate way of describing things, is true creative essence. So imagine that who you really are, being able to live the life that you're really capable of, not necessarily your fantasy perfect life that you'd ask a magic genie for, but being able to tap into more and more and more of who you really are. That the equivalent of that is the sun in the metaphor. And then in order to come here and have this human experience, which I used to call the human game, and now I call it the human story, because the idea of story has become so much more clear to me as an accurate description of what this is all about, that in order to have that experience, it's like a very solid, dense layer of cloud cover was built. And the interesting thing about that is when there's a very thick, dense layer of cloud cover, the sun doesn't go away. It hasn't been destroyed. It hasn't disappeared. It's got just as much light and heat and energy and power as it did. It's just that it's blocked from our awareness or from our experience. And so you knock out the cloud cover, the sun's just sitting there behind it. It'll shine through because it didn't go anywhere. And what my journey has been about, continuing that metaphor, is that I discovered a very unusual way to knock out the cloud cover, to first drill tunnels and then poke holes so a little bit of sun would shine through and a little bit of your life would change, and then making those holes bigger and bigger and knocking out chunks and letting more and more and more of the sunshine in. And whatever the sun shines in on in your life, in your story, changes permanently, radically, and at a very deep and profound level. And that's really what the whole phase 3 ultimate freedom thing is that I knocked out so much cloud cover and so much sun started to shine in that so many things changed. And then I began to look at, all right, what's changed? And what happened and what's been going on since I knocked out this cloud cover, and in seeing what was happening with me and what was changing, I then, as is my habit, documented it, narrated it, and then put it together in a way that other people could replicate the same experience that I had.
Mm-hmm. Now, in that experience, well, for example, I listened to the other day to an audio you had just posted, which was the response to the guy who wrote in saying he was having what he called suicidal thoughts. And I enjoyed how you described and responded to that in terms of describing essentially what's actually going on, rather than believing in the suicidal thoughts or believing in the separate self and all those other components of it that were the assumptions in the initial contact. So in that, it seemed the way that you described the tools, the drilling tools from phase 2, seem to be different than maybe the way you would describe them, say, in Journey to the Infinite or something. So do you have a new perspective on those tools, and do you still find them, I don't know how to say it, necessary, or if a new person approaches you now, do you introduce the process and those phase 2 tools to that person, for example?
Well, this is a tricky thing, and you'll have to bear with me to lay a foundation before I can really answer the question as fully as I'd like to.
Sure.
The clearest metaphor that I have been given to try to give a crutch to somebody to quote-unquote understand the nature of the human experience until it's actually experienced, because it really can be experienced. It can move from an idea and a concept and an understanding to an actual experience that's permanent, not like some peak experience on a drug or in an unusual altered state, but your permanent experience is the metaphor of, and I think I talked about this in the audio you're referring to, is the metaphor of an author of fiction and then the story. So, and I like using the example of Harry Potter because it's the most likely example for everybody to know something about. So Harry Potter is a character in a series of novels, and he lives in a magical world, and he's a wizard, and the story is all about him battling the ultimate evil wizard. And there's all kinds of characters, and there's magic and magic wands and spells and castles and creatures and fighting the bad guys. There's all this stuff that happens in these stories. The author of the story is J.K. Rowling. And you could say words don't serve, as you said earlier on when you start to talk about these things, but we do the best we can. All of the people, places, things, everything that happens in the stories, everything that happens on the pages, everything a character like Harry or anyone else thinks or feels or says or does, or the decisions they make or the battles they fight, all of it, you could say, is J.K. Rowling's consciousness, it's J.K. Rowling's imagination, it's J.K. Rowling's essence. It's all her expressing herself, shaping herself into that story. And it seems like Harry's an individual and separate, and the other characters are individual and separate, and they have free will, and they think and feel, and all these things are happening, and there's castles and buildings, but it's all J.K. Rowling's imagination, consciousness, essence, whatever word you want to use, shaping it into all of that. So you can't separate Harry Potter from J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling is Harry Potter. Harry Potter is J.K. Rowling. This, to me, is the real meaning of what's typically called oneness in spiritual teachings. It's this kind of a thing. It's not that, J.K. Rowling did not create Harry, spin him off as an individual, and then he had independent existence. He is her 24/7. She is him. You can't separate them. The buildings are her. The characters are her. Everything on those pages is her expressing herself creatively. And my experience, my seeing, is that it's the same thing with us. We are characters in a story, except for us, it's 3D, total immersion, experience of a story that goes deeper than reading a novel. But we're characters, and there's an author with a capital A of the stories. And the author of our stories, which I used to call consciousness or expanded self in the teachings that you're aware of, just like J.K. Rowling, shapes itself into everything. It doesn't create us and then spin us off and we're separate and independent. It is us. Its essence is shaping itself into us and everything that happens exactly the way an author of fiction does. Now, an author of fiction is omnipotent. They can create any character with any circumstances, magic, superpowers, tall, thin, rich, poor, whatever. They can make anything happen in a world that technically exists, or a world that doesn't. They're completely omnipotent. They can do anything, have anything happen on the pages of their story. And it's the same thing for true creative essence, who we really are, the author with a capital A of our stories. So if the author of our stories, this is heading back to answering your question, wants to have a character in a story, and all of our lives to me are just these amazing human stories, which is why I call it that now instead of human game, wants to give a character the experience of truth with a capital T, or what's called awakening or enlightenment or illumination, or whatever term, non-dual awareness you or someone listening might have. Because it's omnipotent, it can do that in any way. It could have somebody wake up in the morning at 6 o'clock and boom, their whole experience of reality changes in an instant. And there are stories about people that's happened to. It could have it happen from meditating for 18 years on a mountaintop, It could also facilitate that experience by somebody using the Busting Loose Phase 2 tools that I've shared and that I used religiously for 6.5 years. But it doesn't have to be that way, and there isn't any inherent power in any of those methods or tools unless the author puts it there. You with me on that?
Yes, yes.
If you're reading a story and Harry Potter swings his wand and says da-da-da-da and somebody goes flying across the room, there's no power in the wand, and there's no power in Harry, and there's no power in the spell. The author's consciousness, essence, imagination shaped itself into the cause and effect and the magic appearing there. So for me, and I can't tell you why, I don't really care, but I also don't know. For whatever reason, part of the Robert Scheinfeld story of knocking out cloud cover was using those tools and sharing those tools. And at this point, there's probably, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people all over the world that to one degree or another have embraced that model and used those tools. So that's how I got to being able to experience what I'm calling ultimate freedom, or my actual language for that's more accurate is ultimate freedom awakened in my story. It didn't happen to me personally. It isn't happening to me personally now, but something major shifted in the Robert story. So now that ultimate freedom's awake, phase 3 dynamics are in motion in the Robert story, what I'm all about now is sharing what I call the ultimate freedom experience, which is an experience that supports ultimate freedom awakening in other stories. There aren't any tools in that. There aren't any techniques in that. There aren't any practices in that. It's an experience. And you go through the experience, which you can either do online or you can do live. I offer it from time to time live. It's a 5-day live experience now. And the experience in and of itself shifts things in a deep, profound, and permanent way. But you don't leave with a to-do list. There aren't any special techniques that are super powered to knock out cloud cover. It's not about that. It's a completely different beast in terms of how it works. And so I offer the Journey to the Infinite course free as a gift now to people, which you referred to. There's a deeper experience of that's available. There's an expression of appreciation, meaning a movement of money for that takes it deeper. It's a 24-week experience called Masters of Light. I still offer it because that's how I got where I am, lack of a better term. There's so much value in that for certain people, so I still offer it. But the interesting thing I discovered is when the ultimate freedom stuff first started to happen, I thought to myself, well, this is happening in my story, and it's happening in my story after I embraced those tools, and I used them for so many years, and I used them so often. Does everybody have to do that? Does everybody have to follow in the path that I did, use those tools for multiple years, and then this can happen? And I really didn't know the answer to that question. I suspected the answer was no, but I didn't know. So I started offering the ultimate freedom experience, curious to see what would happen to people that had been using the tools, people that maybe had just started using the tools, and then I was most interested to see what would happen with people that had no experience of anything that I had shared before. This was their first experience, and what I discovered is It isn't necessary to follow the path that I did. It isn't necessary to use those tools. It isn't necessary to use them for multiple years. The ultimate freedom experience can create the same sort of magic and experience if it's part of someone's story. And for some people, the best way for their story, just like it was for me, would be to one degree or another use those tools and embrace that model and then move into this. But what I've discovered is it isn't necessary. And I've had people that came to Ultimate Freedom experience and didn't know anything about me, hadn't read any books, hadn't used any tools, didn't know anything about the phase 2 busting loose model or tools, and boom. And then I've had people that have been involved to varying degrees with other things. Some people, every single thing I've done, they've been through. And you mentioned before being in truth. I don't offer that anymore because Ultimate Freedom replaced it.
Oh, okay, okay.
And I sometimes have a challenge because my experience has been, for the last 10 years, maybe 12 years, it's been there, done that, have that experience to a deep degree on the journey into truth on this train ride, and then pop up at various points when the train stopped and I got off to offer a debrief, and then I'd get back on the train, and then it was kind of, well, what do I offer on my website, and what do I do when something changes radically for me? Do I keep offering all the steps on the train ride, for other people? Do I pull some of them? Do I only offer Ultimate Freedom now? That sometimes has been confusing to me. But right now on my website, you can get the Journey to the Infinite, which is a 12-hour experience that's free as my gift. There's Masters of Light, which goes deeper into those teachings and those tools, which, as I said, is a 24-week program. And then there's Ultimate Freedom that can either be done as an online-based experience or live, and everything else is gone. So that's currently what's available. And so that's the long-winded answer to your question, which is that for some people, using those tools would be the best way because it's an amazing experience, but it's not necessary. And if somebody were to come to me tomorrow and ask me, what do you think I ought to do? What I probably would tell them to do is go to my website, look at the stuff about Masters of Light and Journey to the Infinite and Ultimate Freedom, and see which you feel pulled to. I don't usually give people advice or say, you ought to do da-da-da-da. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, the Ultimate Freedom is a standalone experience. There aren't any prerequisites. There isn't any homework. There isn't any preparation that needs to be done. It's completely self-contained.
Yeah, that sounds like a very interesting experience.
And that's been the thing I've been after my whole life, If I'm going to have somebody's time and energy, whether it's live or it's through an online experience, whatever it is, what can I do to create the biggest impact, the biggest change? And how can I facilitate that with the smallest or someday perhaps non-existent to-do list? My fantasy as a teacher, writer, coach has been to do exactly what Ultimate Freedom is, which is to create an experience that in and of itself does all of the work. And it may ripple out for a while, it tends to after it's over, but there's no to-do list, there's no techniques, there's no practices, there's no methods. The experience itself does the heavy lifting, and then you get to just watch it ripple out after you have it. And again, that's been my fantasy, to be able to create something like that versus what it was before, which is here's a model, here's the tools, you may have to use these for multiple years, or there are other spiritual teachings out there, where you have to spend entire lifetimes or multiple lifetimes before you can get the benefits. And you have to be at a monastery, meditating 8-10 hours a day, and things like that. And even then, they don't tend to deliver the results, my bias. But my fantasy was always that, to be able to facilitate a particular experience that in and of itself would create gigantic change, or at least open the door to that, without there having to be work, effort, techniques, daily practices, for long periods of time at all. And so it's interesting that that's what actually happened.
Right. Well, and that seems it's something that I've noticed since a lot of the people in my sphere of influence have then engaged in the phase 2 tools, and then even some of the happiness book and some of the phase 3 experiences, but people do seem to create the illusion of being caught up in that. They can turn the tools into that same game of I must do these techniques, and when I do them enough, then things will be okay. One day things will be all right. That idea that you're still attempting to change, fix, and improve things, even though by way of the process or by way of phase 2. And some folks had written in and asked about that as well. They've been playing around in that phase for a while.
And there's no problem with that. That happened to me. I mean, ultimately, what became clear to me was you use the tools to use the tools, and where it goes, it goes. You use the tools to knock out the cloud cover, knowing that, yes, when you knock out enough cloud cover, things will change, but you don't apply the process on a daily basis to attract a soulmate or to get out of debt or to be happy or to this or that. You use it to drill through the cloud cover. But, that's the way I was. There was still a hope that at the end of the line from all those tools, there would be a benefit, so to speak. There would be a change. I knew it was playing in the sunshine, and I knew later that I was going to I decided to call it phase 3. And then ultimate freedom, I didn't know what it was going to look like, but I knew it would be good. But despite the fact that I pursued using the tools with that idea, what happened still happened. It doesn't matter. That's not a problem. It doesn't mean that these people are doing something wrong or they're sabotaging their... that's very common, and it happened to me. So it doesn't matter. But if somebody uses the process, or uses the tools, and every time they use it, the mindset is, I'm using this to try to change this specific thing now, that's not going to happen. But it is true, or it's not likely that it will happen, I guess I'd have to say. But it is true that the cumulative use of the tools over time, can't say how much, there's no rule or formula, but over time, cloud cover to varying degrees can get knocked out, and whatever the sun shines in on will change. But it doesn't tend to change, again, in the way, the fantasy perfect way that most people would say, that if a magic genie showed up when they were in phase 1 and said, I'll grant you 3 wishes, what do you want? If they were to say, well, I want this, it isn't likely that when you knock out the cloud cover, those things that you would have wished for in phase 1 to a magic genie will happen. They could. The only guarantee is whatever happens, you're going to love. But there isn't any guarantee that it's going to match some fantasy perfect life kind of scenario that you had in phase 1, because so much of that is so highly distorted by what I call cloud cover dynamics.
Yeah, exactly. I find that when people come within my sphere of influence as well, the initial desire, the initial driving thing for most is not a sense of exploration or enjoyment in the amusement park, so to speak, but is from a sense of pain or suffering or melancholy, these different types of things, or a desire to change, a fear. And then initially they'll get started and start to examine those experiences, and before they know it, the reason that they got started is the thing that actually disappears, or the assumption that something's wrong with their ongoing experience. That starts to dissolve, and then at that point, everything starts to look a little bit different. I mean, because then going at life with a sense of exploration as opposed to a sense of victimhood, even in the same exact circumstances, seems to make things appear differently. I guess that's how I would describe change.
The thing that a lot of people miss too, and perhaps it's quote unquote my fault for not making it more clear, perhaps it's just a dynamic for a lot of people with cloud cover in place, is that yes, there's the desire to change, fix, and improve, but if you look at what was shared, which to me in the teachings is still so valid, except I experience it, lack of a better term, at such a deeper level, is that who we really are, and words don't serve here, but who we really are is more powerful than anybody can possibly imagine. I mean, snap its finger and it can create entire universes populated by trillions of beings, I mean, just unbelievable off-the-charts power. it shaped itself into, created this human experience to have specific experiences that it cannot have any other way. It doesn't have a body, who we really are. It doesn't have emotions. It doesn't need money. Whether there's a lot of it or a little, or there's a lot and then it's lost and then it's gained again. It doesn't fall in love with another person. It doesn't break up and get divorces and date, and it doesn't drive cars, and it doesn't walk, and it doesn't get sick. The whole purpose of the human experience is for who we really are to have these experiences that it cannot have any other way. And in phase one of the experience, that's always the case. In phase one, it's to have as many experiences as possible of the opposite to its nature, which is limitation, restriction, handcuffs, chains, straitjackets, wanting something but not getting it, wanting something, getting it, losing it. All these experiences that involve thoughts and feelings and bodily things and stuff happening in the world that I now call story space. That's the whole point of it. And from our perspectives as the characters in the stories, no, I don't like this thing. I want to get rid of this thing. I want to change, fix, and improve this particular thing. And we try to. And sometimes we succeed temporarily, or we change one thing and something else breaks or whatever. You know how I feel about that from the earlier teachings. But the whole point of it is to have those experiences. And then once those experiences have been had, then who we really are has the desire to have still experiences as a human, still with a body, still in the physical universe, still all the things that are part of the human story, but a different kind of an experience of the human experience, which is what phase 3 and ultimate freedom are all about. But the point of the game in phase 1, which is why I really hammered that home, is to have the kinds of experiences that we complain about, that we want to change. That's what the goal of it was. It's like if you look at every movie that you go to, if you look at every novel that you read, if you look at every video game that you play, if people who are listening play video games, it's always the same thing. All stories are about a hero, whether it's a man or a woman. Hero is a unisex term to me. It's always about a hero that wants to achieve some goal or some set of goals, and they start pursuing that, and they encounter all kinds of obstacles and problems and challenges, and they suffer and struggle, and their plans seem like they're going to work, and then they don't. And that's what the stories are all about. It's about this journey of this hero who's trying to change, fix, and improve their life in a certain way and has all these amazing experiences along the road to that. And when we really love a story, whether it's a novel or it's a movie or it's a TV show that unfolds every week for a certain number of episodes, that's what's happening. And it's the same for us. There's nothing wrong with wanting to change, fix, and improve. There's nothing wrong with goals. There's nothing wrong with being, quote unquote, dissatisfied with what's happening to you. The important thing is to recognize it's all what I call total immersion stories. And that's what it's all about, is to have all those experiences. And then what I discovered, quite by surprise, is that part of the plan, part of the human game, part of the human story is also to continue to be here, still to have a body, still to have limits and restrictions in various forms, but to have radically different experiences, which is what I call the phase 3 and ultimate freedom opportunity. And they are radically different experiences. But the whole point is for who we really are, which again I now call true creative essence, to have all these experiences that it can't have without a human body, without a physical universe, visible and invisible components thereof, and to have all these amazing total immersion story experiences of everything that's possible within the human dynamic. And my guess is true creative essence is simultaneously having all kinds of experiences at the same time that have nothing to do with humans and Earth and physical bodies, and simultaneously for the same reason. But we're human, so we stay focused on that. But that to me is the really important factor. Harry Potter is very unhappy with a lot of things happening in the magical world. He's trying to change, fix, and improve things on every page of the stories. That's what the story's about, and it's the same thing for us. And there's an opportunity for what happens, or the relationship to what happens, the experience of what's happening every day, to also change in radically different ways in what I call phase 3 and now ultimate freedom.
Now, from what you were saying about the ultimate freedom experience, if I'm gathering correctly here, and my understanding of it as well, is there's a lack of volition and goals and aspirations, or maybe even importance. Does that ring true to you? Is there some sort of, I mean, do you feel a sense of importance as you're flowing through a typical day? I mean, I hesitate to even say a typical day, because I know it's more of an open-ended adventure, if I was to describe it. But do you have volition, goals, aspirations that you would describe as such now?
Well, there's a few things I have to say in response to that. First, there's no one way that phase 3 or ultimate freedom looks. Mm-hmm. If we were to take 10,000 characters in ultimate freedom awakened in their story, and we could study the details of how did things change, we would notice certain things that were held in common. We would notice certain trends. But there's no one way that it looks. There's an infinite number of varieties, and there's an infinite number of varieties because who we really are is interested in having an infinite variety of experiences. So it doesn't do it the same way for everybody, not in phase 1, not in phase 2, not in phase 3. So there isn't any one way that it looks. The second thing I need to say before I address the question literally is, we're talking about all of this kind of stuff at idea and concept level, and there's a huge difference between talking about it and sharing ideas and concepts and metaphors and actually experiencing it. Mm-hmm. But until it's actually experienced, that's all we can do. So given that, I'll share a metaphor with you, but understand it can only go so far, but it's pretty accurate to what the experience is like. And the experience of what I'm going to share in the metaphor is something that most people have had. And they can, if they were to listen to this now and then go back and see what I'm talking about in a minute, they can actually say, wow, okay, I get what this is like as an experience. And then you can kind of get what it would be like if that was your life, but only go so far. It's very limited. And the design of the ultimate freedom experience is to actually give this experience to somebody, not just talk about it, not just tell them what it's like. So understand, there's severe limits in me saying what I'm about to say, but the best way I can answer the question is to say, when you read a novel and you're the reader of the story, your relationship to the hero and everything that happens in the story is very different than if the same thing was happening to you in your life. If you're flipping the pages of a novel and all of a sudden the hero has some real, misfortune, whatever, got fired, got partner cheated on them, stock market crashed, they lost all their money, they decided they had cancer, whatever, you're flipping the pages of this novel. You're completely, if you're loving the novel, that's the prerequisite for this metaphor being accurate. If you're bored by it and you aren't enjoying it, this doesn't work. But if it's the kind of book, you don't want to go to sleep at night because you're so riveted by it and you want to know what's going to happen, and you just keep turning the pages because you want to know what's going to happen, anything can happen to the character, and your attitude is kind of, okay, the character just lost all of his money. The character just found out they had cancer. You're feeling all kinds of emotions, you're having all kinds of experiences, but it's different than if it happened in your life. You agree?
Yeah.
The ultimate freedom experience is very much like that. It's very much like you become the reader of your own story. And so you're aware of da-da-da-da happening to a character in a story that you're totally immersed in, but you know it's not you. And you know it's not personal, and the experience of it is very similar to your experience of reading a novel. Except it's deeper. If you're reading a novel, and all of a sudden on page 256, the character pounds their fist on the table, you get an idea that they're angry. If a character says to another character, you really hurt my feelings when you da-da-da-da, you get an idea that their feelings were hurt when you're reading a novel, but you're not them, and it's not the same thing. You only get an idea of their thoughts and their feelings and what's happening inside of them. But with the human story, you actually become the character. You think everything they think, you feel everything they feel, you have everything. I call it a total immersion experience, but it's different. But that's the closest I can give you in terms of a crutch of what it's like. Now, I do an exercise with people where I have them read a chapter from a novel. And then we talk about what was their perspective of what was happening as they were turning the pages of the chapter. And people, and this happens every audience all over the world, it doesn't matter. Sometimes they actually become the character and they forget that they are, Robert or Garrett or whomever. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's like they're floating in this on the ceiling looking down on what's happening. Sometimes they're like behind the character. So there are times that you become completely immersed in what's happening and you feel like you're angry or you're unhappy or your feelings are hurt or you're scared or you're whatever, but it's a very different experience. So in answer to your question, again, giving you a bit of a long-winded introduction and foundation laying, in my story, I don't set goals. I haven't set goals for like 10 years. I'm very much like the reader of a story. When you're reading a novel, you don't set goals for the character of the novel. You just turn the pages and you see what happens. And if the character sets goals, fine. But as the reader, you don't. You with me?
Yes, very much
I'm
so.
like that. I read about the Robert character, but in the Robert story, the Robert character isn't setting goals. The Robert character isn't as, it has a different relationship with emotions and everything else as a result of ultimate freedom. But ultimate freedom could awaken in a story. The relationship could be very much like the reader of a story, and it would be reading the story of a character who is setting goals and who's this and that. So there's always two options. The importance of something like you were talking about before, those kinds of things can still be there, but you're reading about a character that's doing that totally immersed. Mm-hmm. Or certain things can drop away. It just depends on the unique story. But getting back to what you said before, what happened to many people with the Phase 2 and Busting Loose work, and also happens to people as a brief blip with ultimate freedom, is that all of a sudden everything can kind of seem empty or stupid or pointless. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, if nothing's real and, nothing means anything, why should I get up in the morning, like you said? Why should I do anything? First of all, that never lasts. And what it is a temporary blip in what I now call the mind machine that's changing as a result of all of this. And it's a logical idea and concept, almost a computer thing that says, it's just looking at it from an intellectual perspective, and it's what I call buzzing and worrying, and it's saying, it's coming up with a very limited, inaccurate, logical conclusion. Well, if everything's an illusion, it's just a story, and I'm not real, and this is just true creative essence shaping itself into me, and I'm a character. It doesn't last because it's not true. If it was true, just to give you another metaphor, nobody would like reading novels. Nobody would like watching movies. Nobody would like riding rides in amusement parks. Nobody would like watching TV shows. Nobody would play video games because we all know that none of these things are real. We know the characters are fictional. We know nothing's really happening. But we get caught up in the illusion just enough, and we have all kinds of thoughts and feelings and sensations and experiences that we love. And so that's why we do things. We don't need any meaning, spiritual, deep, religious meaning or whatever for reading a novel or watching a movie or having these experiences. We just love having them. And my bias and my experience is it's the same thing with the human story. And so ultimately, if that stage appears of why bother, it doesn't last very long, but then ultimately, lack of a better term, you just relax into the story. And you just enjoy having all these different thoughts, feelings, experiences, body things happening in what I call story space in the world. It's the most amazing story that you've ever experienced, the greatest story ever told, no matter what's happening, because we read novels about tough stuff that happens to people. We watch movies about tough stuff that happens to people. We still enjoy it because we're thinking and feeling and having these experiences. And to me, it's the same thing. So But the relationship to it's different, and the relationship to it's different when Ultimate Freedom is awake. But again, if we took 10,000 stories where Ultimate Freedom awakened, we wouldn't find that everybody became a millionaire and everybody found their soulmate and everybody was just up, 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 nothing but good luck and wonderful things happening. That would happen with some people in some stories, but in general, excuse me one sec. Sorry, I had to cough.
That's okay.
The human story continues to have the same kinds of diversity and the same kinds of dynamics. It's just that it's very different. And a lot of the stuff that we used to call bad and bad luck and stressful and ups and downs and a lot of those kinds of things can drop away and do drop away, but not in everybody's story because everybody's story isn't about that. And again, if you look at the novels you love the most, the movies you love the most, the TV shows you love the most, it's not about a character that has nonstop good luck. Nonstop, quote unquote, good things. It's about all kinds of things happening to the characters and you being along for the ride and having all these different experiences. And my seeing and experiencing with capital S and E now is it's the same exact thing for us. But phase 1 is about limitation and restriction. Phase 2 is about knocking out the cloud cover and opening the doorway to less limitation and restriction and more sunshine. And phase 3 is about playing in the sunshine in ultimate freedom with a more truthful relationship with everything that's happening. So in phase 3, there isn't the need for a lot of the same kinds of quote unquote bad stuff to happen because it just isn't needed anymore. You with me?
Yes.
It's needed in phase 1 because that's what it's about. It's needed in phase 2 because it gives you the opportunity on the path I've offered to use the tools. So many of the things aren't needed anymore in phase 3, so they drop away, no matter how persistent the pattern was. But again, I don't want to, the reason I'm hammering this so hard is because I don't want to communicate an inaccurate message that when the sunshine is shining and ultimate freedom is awake and phase 3 is the story dynamic, that everything's going to be perfect and everyone's going to love you and you're going to be a millionaire and you're never going to get sick and blah, 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 because that could happen, but it isn't likely because that's not what great stories are about. And all of this we go into in great depth at an experiential level, not just idea and concept and ultimate freedom, because again, the stuff I just said is pure idea and concept and it can only go so far. Even if it's very appealing, it can only go so far until it's actually experienced, and that's where the magic is.
That's something that a few of the people who've written in, I sent out an email to the list and to people in my sphere of influence and some folks I know that have been working with your tools and teachings for quite some time. And some of what they wrote in relates in that way. One of the questions, and this is a summation of a few different questions that all seem to say kind of the same thing, which is, I'm kind of in conflict about how phase 2 and then even phase 3 seems to require new beliefs built on top of my old ones, that I'm the ultimate power in the universe creating everything. The tools are nice, but the basis feels shaky or dishonest for me. How is counting on it any less desperate or ridiculous than believing in God or something else? So people have brought up that idea of, is this just new beliefs? I think people desiring to have an experience of it, as opposed to, again, the just the metaphors or the ideas around it.
Yeah, I mean, just to address that point specifically, some people, that's all it is. You know, it's another Band-Aid that gets put over a cut, you know, or a wound or whatever. But my bias, and again, remember what I said before, all of this is about what true creative essence, what I used to call consciousness or expanded self, is doing from behind the scenes. If it's about knocking out cloud cover, if it's about more sun shining in, then it isn't going to be about accepting some new belief because some new belief isn't going to do anything. It really is about knocking out cloud cover, experiencing more and more sunshine and everything changing in deep, profound, and permanent ways, which is what happened in, again, I refer to myself now in the third person, what happened in the Robert story. But if we were to study, 100,000 people that embraced the Busting Loose Phase 2 model and used the tools, and we could isolate it all, we would find that there would be an awful lot of people that, yeah, that's all it was. They just overlaid a new sugar-coated, cool-sounding spiritual belief over some other one, and then at the idea and concept level, tried to change their life with that new belief, and nothing would much change, and they'd be despondent about it, and one more thing that was crap that didn't work. But then we'd also find people like me and like many other people that I know, that the use of the tools, the embracing of the model over time did in fact knock out cloud cover, which to me, and I made this very clear in all of the earlier teachings, the Phase 2 Busting Loose teachings are not about changing beliefs. They are not about exchanging limiting, restricting beliefs for empowering beliefs. They aren't a technique to do that. They aren't about that. If you want to use that language, I always said, it's about exchanging beliefs, lies, illusions, and stories for a direct experience of truth. That's what it was always about for me, although certainly it could only be about new beliefs for somebody else. And that's what happened in the Robert story, and that's what's happened in so many other people's stories whose journeys I'm aware of, that the use of those tools, the embracing of the model, did in fact knock out cloud cover, did in fact, in the story, excuse me, my voice dries out sometimes when I talk a lot and then I cough, did in fact appear at the story level to make the same kind of gigantic change that happened with me. But is it going to happen for everybody? Of course not. I don't think you'll ever find any system, teaching, model, method, tool, or technique, no matter what it is, that will appear to work for everybody. That's never going to happen. And it isn't up to me anyway. Ultimately, again, everything's up to the author with a capital A. True creative essence, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, whether something's going to work or not, how it's going to work, how long it's going to take. Just like everything that happened to Harry Potter and when it happened was all decided, so to speak, written, so to speak, by J.K. Rowling, not decided by Harry. If it was up to Harry, he would have defeated Voldemort in the first book. But it didn't happen until the end of the seventh book, and that's because there were all these experiences that he needed to have and other people needed to have and the story to unfold and stuff to happen, and then it happened when it was meant to happen. It wasn't up to Harry. If it was up to Voldemort, he would have killed all the good guys, but that's not the way the story was written. So anyway, to me, this is the most amazing thing that I've ever experienced. It's the most amazing thing that I've ever shared. This ultimate freedom thing is the most amazing thing that I've ever created. And to me, there's no words to describe how extraordinary it is, and as difficult as so many periods of getting here have been. And you talked earlier about the suicidal thing. I mentioned this, I think, in the audio. I can't even count how many times I could say that those kinds of thoughts appeared in what I now call inner space over the last 10 years on this journey to ultimate freedom awakening for Robert, in my story. It could be thousands of times that thoughts like that appeared. I can't do this anymore. If you're going to keep doing this to me, get me out of here. Can't you just give me a fucking break,
Yeah.
Do you continue to have to beat on me and kick me even when I'm already down and bleeding? And, so many things like that. But when I look at where it all led, and I look at what's possible, and I look at what's happening with people that go through the ultimate freedom, it's beyond extraordinary and nothing I ever anticipated. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I always knew Phase 3, playing on the Sunshine, was going to be cool. I definitely wanted to get there, so to speak, bear with all the language, but the truth is I had no specific idea of what it was going to be like. And if you'd asked me to guess, I wouldn't have guessed anything like what I sketched out briefly about being the reader here, what happens, what the actual experience. I didn't have a clue. completely surprised me and delighted me, and it's extraordinary.
Oh, and that's exciting, and an exciting thing for people to at least look forward to, or to start to anticipate. It does remind me, as we get close to the end, I'll bring up the last bit of the listener questions. One of them was in relation to those feelings, like, can you just give me a fucking break? I'm over this. Can we just step into the sunlight now and start playing? Somebody, Andrew, wrote in asking some, including Jed McKenna, because many of us have read his books then after seeing your recommendation. Some, including Jed, make the journey towards seeing clearly or towards ultimate freedom seem painful. What is your perspective on this? And we just kind of covered that, but in more detail, is there a specific experience that you can point to that was indicative of a move away from believing yourself to be a victim in the storyline into more of the reader?
The thing is, Garrett, a lot of people won't like this, but it's where I am. Mm-hmm. To my bias, those kinds of questions are coming from, lack of a better term, an aspect of the mind that's trying to understand an experience in advance of having it. Mm-hmm. And you can't. It's not just that you can't understand a Phase 3 ultimate freedom experience in advance of having it. You can't do that with anything. Mm-hmm. If you were going to, somebody told you, oh my God, this isn't a great example, but it's just what's coming to mind, you know?
Sure.
Starbucks has this new drink, and it's the most delicious thing in the world, and it's called da-da-da-da. And the mind tries to understand what it's going to taste like before it tastes it.
Yeah.
You can't. You can't understand and then when it comes to something like truth with a capital T, Phase 3, ultimate freedom, there's no way the mind can wrap itself around it. And sometimes I'll go there, but in general, I don't. So when there's a question like that, you know, is there some sort of a something that kind of points to whatever? Yeah, but it wouldn't do you any good if I told you.
Sure.
And again, There isn't any one way. You know, I'm intimately aware of what happened in the Robert story, and I'm intimately aware of what's happened in, you know, maybe 100 other stories of ultimate freedom awakening. But there isn't any one way, as I said. So even if I were to point to something, the odds are it wouldn't be what would happen to the other person. But the best advice really is you just got to take this journey and let it reveal itself to you in the way that it reveals itself to you, with its own unique wrinkles for you, and let the mind be when it wants to have a prediction of things to come, a preview of things to come. Because number one, again, the preview isn't possible, and any attempt would fall flat. The best thing that could happen is this part of the mind, which I now call the mind machine, would buzz and whir and say, okay. And it would check it off its to-do list to try to understand that, and it would file away a folder, you know, in a filing cabinet. I understand that one now, but nothing would really happen. So
Sure. Mm-hmm.
You can't speculate on these things. You have to do what you do, experience what you experience, and allow these things to reveal themselves. And that's where the fun is, too. And I'm completely convinced now, and again, the same thing's true with a movie, and the same thing's true with a novel and a TV show or a video game, whatever. I'm completely convinced that surprise and fun are inextricably entwined. And the only reason anybody does not want to be surprised about what's going to happen in the future is when underneath their desire to know what's going to happen is fear. They want to know what's going to happen in advance of it happening because they're afraid something bad, I'm being general, but they're afraid something bad's going to happen, and they want to try to stop it or prevent it or prepare themselves for it. If there's no fear about the future, we don't want to know. We want to be surprised. And so many things on this journey are such delicious surprises with their unique variations that I'm glad it's that way.
Yeah, that's something we talk about a lot.
You know, the mind has an infinite capacity to want to know, understand, wrap itself around something in advance of it happening, but it just can't. And it's even less able to when it comes to truth with a capital T. Because the mind wasn't designed to be able to process that. It wasn't designed to be able to understand that. It was meant to be able to process the story, what I used to call the illusion and the hologram, and to do that in a flawed, distorted way. But it wasn't built to be able to. You can't think your way through the cloud cover. You can't think your way into phase 3, and you can't think your way into ultimate freedom. Mm-hmm. It's an experience. You can't get there with mind and ideas and concepts.
Sure, and like you were saying, you can't think your way into rock climbing. You can't think your way into swimming in the ocean, so to speak, either. There's got to be the steps of getting there and then getting into it and having the experience. And then...
Yeah, and actually the opposite tends to be true, and most coaches will ultimately tell you, stop thinking about it, and just do it. Let your body learn it, whatever. You're thinking about it is getting in the way. You're thinking about it, trying to run it from your mind, is slowing your progress down. It's not just that it doesn't work, it's that it generally produces the opposite result. That used to drive me crazy in phase 1 because with cloud cover in place, I always tried to run everything through the mind. Even if I was learning a dance step, the mind would say, okay, I'm supposed to pick up my left foot, and then I'm supposed to twist it, and then I'm supposed to tilt my hips, and then I'm supposed to take her whatever. And I got so confused and was such a clod, and I could never do any of that kind of stuff trying to think my way there. But when ultimately that stops and the body can just learn it from whatever way, then it becomes effortless and it becomes fun, and the mind just gets in the way. But the mind gets in the way of just about everything, by design. Try to get in the way on the journey into truth, on the journey into phase 3, on the journey into ultimate freedom. But the opportunity and what the ultimate freedom experience is designed to do is to dynamite that. I mean, that's why I say to people, the ultimate freedom experience is a literally mind-blowing experience. And I actually show a little image that I got, from Google Images of a guy, his head's exploding because it does blow the mind, and it completely shifts the way that it operates, lack of a better term, because so many people, of which I was one, go so much into mind and thinking and intellect and logic to try to live their life and protect themselves and whatever, and it really gets in the way on this particular journey because it cannot go there. You cannot think your way here, but the mind will try if that's an old habit from phase 1. But the good news is the ultimate freedom experience is designed to, again, not give you a technique. When you're overthinking, do this. When your mind's getting in the way and you want it to shut the hell up, do this. It's not that. It's that the experience in and of itself causes a shift to the way what we're calling the mind, or I now call the mind machine, operates. It just happens. It's not a technique. It's not something you leave with a to-do list of, okay, I got to do this now to shut the mind up. Stop it from intruding. It just happens. All of this stuff just happens. And you get to read about it as the reader with a capital R, going back to what ultimate freedom is ultimately about, using that metaphor.
Yeah, that's very fascinating, and you've definitely, I think, piqued my interest and as well as a lot of other people's interest to just go through the experience, and even hearing about it is just refreshing and relieving on some level, that it's set apart from all these masses of techniques that have such an urgency, and that you manage your time and manage your budget and keep track of everything in great detail and be very worried if it fluctuates in this way, and just these constant dictates of being worried and managing systems and whatnot. So to finally have an experience that's just an opportunity to open up to have the experience, to enjoy it, to be there and to let it occur, to simply just let things occur so often.
Well, but see, even that you're not really doing. That's just what happens.
Yeah. I see
not
what you mean.
that you make an intellectual decision or you decide or you use some technique to let go.
Right.
Letting go just happens. And it's interesting because I'm just finishing up, I'll call it the script for a webinar, and it's about ultimate freedom because I've been searching for a way to communicate for people who want to know about it, what it's really all about. And I just finished this script for this webinar that I'll probably launch in the next couple of weeks or something. And it's interesting because this is a big part of it. There's no techniques, there's no tools, there's no methods, there's nothing that you can do. It's something that just happens, you know, and I know there's going to be a whole lot of people in the audience that are going to love that, but not really believe it, or love that and believe that and resonate with it, and they'll participate, and then there'll be other people that'll say crap, you know. Pure bullshit, he's just trying to get my money with some other slick snake oil salesman, spiritual, whatever. Because it isn't what's taught out there. What's taught out there is always some version of set an intention, set a goal, decide on a specific outcome that you want to produce, even if it's enlightenment, you know, a spiritual outcome, so to speak, and then go find some guru, teacher, master, person to model, technique, system, method, practice, and then do it over and over and over, and if it doesn't work, change your approach slightly or whatever else it is, but it's always select a goal, do, and then you'll get it. And my bias is if you look at the world, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in phase one for things about financial success or overcoming whatever. It doesn't work for mainstream things. It certainly doesn't work for truth with a capital T things. I mean, but by design, because it creates unique stories and opportunities for unique experiences, we get on these paths and we set these goals and we embrace these techniques and tools and methods that don't work in terms of getting you to the ultimate, but the journeys are extraordinary, which is why True Creative Essence writes those stories and experiences those stories. But it is interesting from another perspective on how hypnotized we all are and how fooled we all are that we just conveniently forget, quote unquote, that these paths always lead to dead ends. We never get where we think we're going to get with these particular techniques, or if we do, it doesn't last, or if we do and it lasts, then okay, great, we got this one good thing, but then there's some other bad thing that we start battling, and your net quality of life never really changes. We just conveniently forget that this is what we deal with day after day after day, and so we embrace the next technique. We set the next goal, we target the next change, fix, and improve target, and we continue doing this. And the next thing you know, you've been doing that for 50 years. And anyway, the exciting thing is there is an alternative. There is a different way to experience everything. There's a radically different opportunity for the content along those lines to change of what's actually happening inside of you and outside of you, and to have a radically different experience of whatever it is, no matter what it is. And that's what I call ultimate freedom in phase 3. And in the Robert character's story, you know, my character, Robert, was written to come up with these unique discoveries and to share these things. And as it turns out, it's being replicated by other people. When I first started to have some of these discoveries, I can't remember if we talked about this, what actually occurred to me is, I don't know if this is going to be transmittable. I don't know if anybody else is going to be able to get any benefit out of what I just did or what I used. There was a possibility in my mind this was just Weird Robert's weird solution to his screwed upness, you know?
Yeah.
And it was never going to help anybody else. And the truth is, I was quite surprised, particularly with Busting Loose, because I thought, wow, I've always been kind of fringy. I've always been kind of out there, and now I'm really out there. So the odds are very few people are going to be interested in what I have to say now. And the exact opposite happened. But, and so again, there is a path into truth with a capital T. There is a path into phase 3. In my language, there is a path into ultimate freedom that is available, and it's going to be a path that's going to get written into certain people's stories. It won't unfold the same way. It won't unfold at the same time frame. It'll all be unique. And that's what's happening in this story. And I couldn't be more thrilled to have had the experience myself, so to speak, and to be in a position in my story of being a facilitator. I mean, I do this, the Ultimate Key to Freedom, with a few exceptions. Like you mentioned, I got invited to do it in Ojai in November. And I'm doing it twice in Australia this month. and once in Denmark at the end of May. But normally I do it a few times a year in my house, and I limit it to 10 people. And I can't even tell you how enjoyable it is for me to offer this experience, period, particularly at my house. It's very different than being in the ballroom, of a hotel or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And to watch what happens as this experience unfolds for people, it's extraordinary. And from my own selfish perspective, it's the most fun that I ever have in life, I feel like saying. That's not totally accurate, but I feel like saying that. It's one of the highlights of my life to offer this and to share this and to go through this with people, whether it's live or it's, through the online experience, and then I get questions and we interact in different way. I love it. I'm thrilled that it's part of what's happened in my story.
Yeah, that definitely radiates out from everything I see you put out there, even in spite of that, some of what we talked about, the illusion that we create, that it's painful to expand and all these things. One refreshing thing I've noticed about your approach is that you seem to resonate this sense of joy throughout it all. And it does make me look back, I look back at certain experiences I used to have where I was completely mired in certain beliefs and pains and seeming importance of things. And looking back, those were wonderful, intense experiences in their own right, regardless of whatever the character's preference, Garrett's preferences were at any given moment. The experiences themselves were so rich. And then watching people expand and just from when I share some of your materials with some of my own clients, it's wonderful to hear their report back, and it's always something different, always something new that sticks out to each person. So it is a wonderfully unique personal experience, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. Whatever way people listening feel motivated, just click on the links and follow your way through, and you'll end up where you need to be. All of Robert's materials are a lot of fun.
And if when you put links, put a link to, there's a page on my website. The button at the top says events, but when you actually go there, the link says calendar. But put that there, because when this webinar launches, which will be sometime in the next few weeks, it'll be there. Mm-hmm. And that'll be where you could sign up for it. So if people want to know more about Ultimate Freedom, they might want to go through that webinar, and it'll be on that page.
Excellent. Yeah, and then once that's out, I'll make sure the links are updated and keep everybody in the loop. So,
did you get any other questions you'd like me to address?
Yeah, we can go through a couple more here. Yeah, there was these ones are directly from the audience, so there may be some where there's a little repetition, but I think always going back toward that same point might be useful for people anyway. So, one is, there's a group of guys that I end up working with, and a lot of them end up duplicating the same experience, which is, what would you say to a guy who's creating the illusion of himself, living in fear of what other people think about him, and saying that he feels paralyzed by that fear? So guys will have that experience, and they wanted to ask you, what do they do if they're feeling paralyzed by fear?
Sorry.
Sorry.
If somebody said that at an Ultimate Freedom event, obviously my answer would be different.
Sure.
But what I would say first, to repeat what I said before, is if the purpose of phase one of the human game is for True Creative Essence, my new label for who you really are, to have experiences opposite to its natural state. If you look around the world, fear is obviously one of those big opposite to natural state experiences that's rampant in the human experience. That's going to happen. There's going to be stuff like that that's built into the cloud cover, because that's part of the human experience in phase one, to be afraid of all kinds of things. He's giving one variation that's shared by many people, whether they're conscious of it or not. There's all kinds of other fears that people have, but fear is a big part of phase one. And it's there because it gives who you really are the opportunity to have a unique experience of the fear itself, of what's happening in the body at that time, of what's happening in the story at that time, the circumstance circumstances, you know, you're with a woman, you're with a man, and you're at work, whatever it is. It's all about having unique experiences and having unique stories unfold. So that's part of phase one. And if it means anything to this guy, I had that. And I had crazy variations of that being a public speaker, because I had this crazy shit in the cloud cover that would say stuff like, if I ever showed up to be a speaker and I had a pimple on my face, if I ever showed up to be a speaker at an event talking about this kind of stuff and I was the slightest bit overweight, even if it was all in my head and nobody noticed, then I might have no credibility. Nobody would believe me if I wasn't perfect. I had all kinds of things in my personal life of being afraid of what other people would think about me in other contexts too. I mean, but most people do, because that's part of it. So that's the first piece, is recognizing, again, you read novels, you watch movies, even the heroes are afraid of things and have insecurities and stuff. I mean, that's part of the deal. The what to do if you're embracing the teachings is, if you're fearful, you're uncomfortable, so the opportunity you have, which I did for 6.5 years, is to apply the process to it. When ultimate freedom awakens, or the experience of true happiness that I talked about in the Ultimate Key to Happiness book, awaken in your story, then it isn't fear and it isn't bad and it's not terrible and you're not paralyzed anymore. It's a completely different experience of that same emotion. But for me anyway, that was later on down the line, and when I was caught in the middle of it, I feel paralyzed by this, I feel so uncomfortable by this, I applied the process. So those are the two things I'd say. It's part of the human experience. There are very few exceptions of people that don't have major fears of whatever. And if they say that they don't, it's not usually true. And there is the opportunity from using the tools and also with the happiness teachings and the freedom teachings for that to change. Meanwhile, if this person is embracing the other teachings, the easiest thing to do, and what quote unquote worked so well for me long term, is applying the process to those feelings when they arise.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And hopefully those guys can take that and dive back into their experience, and whatever happens will happen. Another one that came in was, I've just completed looking at the Journey to the Infinite videos, and they fit really well with some psychedelic experiences I've had. Robert, have you ever taken a psychedelic substance or had a mystical experience? And if so, what effect, if any, has this had on your life or your thinking? Do you think these types of experiences help people move into and stay in phase 2 and ultimately phase 3? I think I know what your answers will be here, but I will listen with curiosity.
Well, first tell me what you think my answer is going to be.
What I think your answer is, well, I know that you mentioned particularly the cocaine experience in the Journey to the Infinite, when you were relating some of your own personal stories. I would guess that you, if you have taken a psychedelic substance, and I know you have because you mentioned the yahe, the ayahuasca. And again, I'd say you'd say, well, that those experiences happen to be part of your storyline, but just like in Harry Potter, they don't necessarily have any more or less relevance than any other part of your storyline. It's just all the journey that has, in your case, led up to the ultimate freedom awakened in your story experience. That's how I would guess that you might answer that question.
That's all accurate. I'd add a couple of other pieces. I was not consciously aware of what I'm about to say until maybe 1.5 years ago. But then when I became aware of it and I looked back on my story, it made perfect sense. But I really didn't have any kind of a clue of it until recently. And that is, the Robert story seems to have been about experiencing as much truth with a capital T as you possibly can, while in ordinary daily life, waking consciousness, let's call it. That was the goal. There are a lot of experiences that people will talk about on psychedelic drugs and other kinds of things where they're not functional. You know, they couldn't drive, they couldn't talk to anybody else really, they couldn't be in a relationship, they couldn't work. It's such a shockingly different kind of an altered state experience that they're not functional in normal life. And my desire has been, again, I wasn't aware of this consciously until recently, was to experience as much truth as possible while being in normal waking consciousness so that you could have it all the time, number one. And number two, you don't have to go take something and quote unquote go somewhere else in order to have the experience. So my journey has been biased and skewed by that being the underlying theme. Having said that, I had one experience with a substance that's called DMT when Ultimate Freedom was awakening, and it was very, very supportive to me while it was awakening in various ways that I talk about in the Ultimate Freedom experience. But it was one blip. It was one experience. It was very supportive in a particular context. I have absolutely no interest in taking that substance again. And that's not because it was a quote-unquote bad experience. Quite the contrary. It just isn't on my path. Mm-hmm. But I know other people, and there are other people that have contacted me that have said, I facilitate having psychedelic drug experiences, altered states of consciousness experience facilitated by natural or unnatural substances to help people awaken to the truth and experience the truth, even in waking consciousness, where it can be retained. And they insist that that's what's happening and that's the goal. And if True Creative Essence wanted to write a story where that happened, it could.
Sure.
Not my story.
Sure.
So it has not played much of a role, but that one exception, that DMT experience, was very useful. And beyond that, I haven't had any other experience that I would call psychedelic. I mean, even when I tried the ayahuasca, I would not have described it as psychedelic. Mm-hmm. I haven't tried other things like, mushrooms or LSD or any of those other kinds of typically psychedelic things. But again, my story is very biased by a desire to experience the truth, all day, every day in normal waking consciousness when you're totally functional and living your normal life. That's been my goal. And to me, that's what Ultimate Freedom is. And it has certain things in common with some of those experiences and certain things not. Because, again, you couldn't be functional. Some of these experiences people have, that are called near-death experiences.
The Art of Not Giving.
Even just experiencing this light that felt like more love than they've ever experienced in their entire life. You couldn't live your normal life if you felt like that 24/7.
Right, yeah.
But was it a great experience? Yeah. Would a lot of those people love to have it again? Some of those people spend the rest of their lives trying to have that again. Not dying, but having that experience again. So they can be great for stories, as you said. They can be unbelievable experiences. My bias, and it's just my bias, is they don't ultimately contribute to what I call ultimate freedom, because that's a different thing. But could they? Of course. Anything could, because True Creative Essence can write anything appearing to be true, just like any fiction author can.
Well, speaking of fiction authors, one of the other questions that came up was... just off the top of your head, what are some of your favorite books and movies that have been extremely supportive? And especially in how it relates to ultimate freedom. So I suppose the what's on the top of that list if we have to do it in a linear way.
Oh boy. If you go to my website and you subscribe to my email list, one of the emails that comes automatically is a list of movies that I recommend as being supportive. And there's so many of them, but I'm drawing a blank right now. The first Matrix movie, continues to be one of my favorites, and that appears to have the most amazing stuff that's ultimately supportive. But I would suggest you do that, because at this point there's probably, about 20 movies that, and then there are times people write in and they say, I think you should add this movie to the list because I really think it's supportive for players and knocking out cloud cover. And I watch the movie and I say, I don't get that at all. To me, there's nothing supportive in that at all, but I'm glad it was to you, so different things for different people. But in terms of books, there's one set of books, I can't remember the author's name is Terry Schott, Schott. And it's either 3 or 4 books, I think. I think the first one's called The Game. And it's a series. It's of 4 books or 5 books or whatever else it is. And, not to be taken literally, but I found that to be not only a great story that I loved, but also very supportive to this particular journey and getting in a different way what the human experience is like. There's some distortion in it to my bias, but it was enjoyable. One of those things I didn't want to go to sleep, like I said, because I wanted to keep reading, and very supportive. No other books are coming to mind at the moment, but with the journey into ultimate freedom, any fiction book and being aware of what your relationship is to what's happening in the story can be very supportive. Doesn't matter what's happening actually.
And that should apply, I suppose, to TV shows, movies, kind of anything you're doing any kind of entertaining fiction.
That's true, but for me, for reasons that I can't really explain here because it would take too long, but I do an Ultimate Freedom. It's a different experience with a novel, and I'll just say this. You know, you open up a novel and you're reading, and there's people, places, and things and stuff happening, right? Mm-hmm. But if you just look at the book, what's the book?
Yeah, it's just flat sitting there in front of you, yeah.
What?
Marks
What is
of
it?
ink, paper, ink.
It's paper and black symbols usually.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But when you read it, it's not really just paper and black symbols. What it really is, lack of a better term, is the creative energy of the author that's behind those symbols. And when you read them, this whole world pops into your imagination and all this stuff happens. Mm-hmm. It's not spoon-fed to you like a TV show or a movie. You actually construct the whole universe in your imagination. So to me, a novel is a much more accurate and useful experience for Phase 3 and Ultimate Freedom. But yes, technically, any movie, any TV show, any story, quote-unquote, if looked at from a certain perspective, can be supportive. But to me, the most supportive experience is reading fiction for that reason, speaking very simply. It's really a very magical, amazing thing when we read that we all take for granted. Mm-hmm. There's some mysterious, magical thing that happens when you look at these black symbols on this paper that, you know, creates this whole thing. We don't think about it. I never really thought about it until a couple of years ago, and then I went, wow. Every time you read, there's this amazing thing that happens, this magical thing that happens that I've completely missed and took for granted. But it's so useful for these purposes.
So one more final question before we wrap it up here, which is in relation to that as well. So if what you're calling true creative essence shapes both my character and then the screen on which things appear, the screen of perception or consciousness, is there anything about me that is coherent and ongoing beyond just my thoughts that there is?
Well, when it comes to Phase 3 and Ultimate Freedom, I talk about everything occurring at two levels. There's what I call the truth level with a capital T, and there's at the story level. At the truth level, it's always just true creative essence. So even if the character appeared to have some coherent, independent, whatever existence, it would still just be true creative essence shaping itself into that. You know, and what I would mean to say to this person if we were interacting, you know, in person is I would say, you can't just say, do I have any coherent or whatever, you know, I mean, put some meat on the bones. Tell me, what do you mean? You know, life after death, a soul leaving the body when somebody dies and going somewhere else. I mean, if they told me something like that, that's putting a little bit more specific, whatever that is, it would still just be true creative essence doing it.
Sure. So if someone were to ask...
At the story level...
Go ahead.
It could be either way. There certainly could be a particular character that would appear to have some coherent essence that continues, and there could be not. Again, to me, I talk about this in Ultimate Freedom. I used to think there was one way that it is. I may not know what it is, but there's one way that it is. You know, there's either reincarnation or there's not. There's either life after death and the following options of what can happen after you die, or there's not. You know, there's either karma or there's not. And what I've realized is there isn't any one way that it is. It's just a question of how true creative essence wants to manage the raw material of a story to make a great story. So it can make anything appear to be the way it is. You with me?
Yeah.
My bias is no, there isn't any independent essence. It's not like the spiritual teachings where there's some soul, there's some independent spark of consciousness or God or whatever else that goes into bodies and has multiple lifetimes and goes out of bodies. My bias, and it's just my bias, I can't prove it. I can't document it. It's just my experience. It could be wrong. But it's my bias that while a story could unfold in which any of those things appear to happen, ultimately it's just true creative essence. And it doesn't spin it something off and give it separate. It's always that.
Right, yeah. Well, that makes sense.
Does Harry Potter have some coherent, independent whatever from J.K. Rowling? An argument could be made that he does. Somebody could argue, well, there's this Harry on the pages and there's this Harry in the movies. And depending on how they define coherent whatever, certainly an argument could be made. But my bias is no. But any story in which that appears to be true could unfold. Mm-hmm. There could be awareness of a character named Garrett, and Garrett dies tomorrow. Excuse me. And in a hospital, and has an experience like you've probably seen or people listening have seen, where out-of-body experience. And Garrett's out of the body looking at his dead body on the hospital room bed, and then Garrett goes off into the light and goes into some other dimension and has some other... that certainly could happen.
Sure.
Does it happen to everybody? My bias, no. Does it have to? Is that the way it is for all humans? My bias, no. Could it? Sure. If it would make an interesting story for true creative essence to experience. Mm-hmm. And again, my bias is those kinds of questions underneath them come from the fact that if there isn't some coherent something about who I am, then that would be a bad thing.
Sure.
And they're trying to find an answer as to why they aren't, they would cease to exist or they don't, there's some mind thing going on there that would be a really bad thing. And the opposite is what's true.
Yeah.
Who you really are is the most amazing, extraordinary, powerful, wise, abundant, whatever word you want to use, force in any universe. There's no words to describe. You couldn't be more special. You couldn't be more extraordinary than you are. So that's just, to me, a cloud cover mind story, my bias. But certainly anything that would look like what he's pointing to could appear in a story, just because, again, it could in a novel. You could be reading a novel and the hero dies on page 300 and they have an out-of-body experience and go to some other dimension and then go into some other kind of an existence as an energy or a soul or whatever. You could read that in a novel. You could see a movie about it. Mm-hmm. If it happens there, the odds are it'll happen in a total immersion way in somebody's story. But can I prove any of that? No. That's just my experience and knowing at a level beyond ideas and concepts and anything that I could ever explain. And the wrinkle in it all is there isn't any one way that it is. So I'm not fixed on one opinion, mm-hmm. except the opinion of there's no one way that it is. And if true creative essence wants to experience it, it can shape itself into anything. Just like a fiction author can.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right.
And again, the thing I want to leave here with mm-hmm. is this is all ideas and concepts, no matter how interesting or fascinating they've been, but every single piece of this can be experienced. And you don't have to be on, although it could happen that way, you don't have to be on a drug and it doesn't have to be, someone doesn't have to tap you on the head. And you don't have to spend thousands of years and burn off all your karma and all these things that are out there in stories. It's something that can be experienced. And it's something, not that it's better or it's good that it's that way, but it's something that can be experienced relatively quickly, if that's what's been written into the story. And it isn't something you have to accept on faith. It isn't something that's, thousands or millions of years away. Everything that I've said here can be verified at the experiential level from your own experience. And that's ultimately what Ultimate Freedom's about. The event or the online experience is about opening a gateway for you to actually have these experiences and really see, with a capital S, the truth of what's really going on. And when that happens, everything changes.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like a great place for us to wrap up. We covered a lot of interesting ground, and I'm really happy to have had you on the show again. So I want to say thanks one more time very much.
My pleasure. I love this. As you said, you can tell. So
yeah, it's awesome, and I love having you on the show. So we'll hopefully we'll do this again sometime, and I look forward to hearing all of you who are listening, your thoughts, reactions, any questions, just go ahead and post them there. And
remember, the odds are great that what I call the mind machine will buzz and whir and kick out all kinds of objections and yeah buts and I don't know about that, or if that's true, then this bad thing, whatever. And it's likely that a lot of this will stimulate a lot of noise in the mind. Maybe mixed with excitement or fascination, maybe not. But that's the other opportunity, is to realize it's just noise. It's just the mind. It doesn't mean anything. And there's the opportunity to actually experience all of this if it's part of your story.
excellent. Well, thanks again, and thanks everybody for listening. And we'll talk to you all again very soon.
Cool. Have a great day.
You too as well, Robert. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Art of Not Giving a Fuck podcast. For more info, visit artofnotgivingthefuck.com or radicalanddavid.com.